Good night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Hi, my name is Louis Armstrong, and I was born on August 4th, 1901 in New Orleans, Louisiana. I had a very difficult childhood. My father, William Armstrong, was a factory worker and abandoned my family before I was even born. My mother, Mary Albert, was only 15 when she had me. She was a prostitute and left me and my little sister Beatrice in my grandmother's care. My grandmother, Lucy, raised me and my sister. I had to leave school when I was in 5th grade to start working. A local Jewish family gave me a job collecting junk and delivering coal. They encouraged me to start singing and often invited me into their homes for meals. I would also often sing in the streets for money. When I was 11, I was sent to a home for boys because I fired a gun in a New Year's Eve celebration. The disciplined atmosphere inspired me to work hard on mastering the cornet. I was released 2 years later. I always looked up to Joe King Oliver. He was one of New Orleans' top musicians. He became a father figure to me. Oliver began acting as my mentor by giving me pointers on the horn. He also recommended that I took his spot in his band. I improved rapidly. I was mostly featured playing in harmonies and ensembles. I was soon able to stop working manual labor jobs and began concentrating full-time on my cornet. I was playing at parties, dances, funeral marches, and bars that typically host musical acts. In 1919, I spent my summer playing on riverboats with a band led by Faye Maribel. I then moved to Chicago in 1922 to join King Oliver and his Creole jazz band. I made my first recordings with Oliver on April 5th, 1923. That day, I earned my first record solo on Chimes Blues. I then joined a band in New York City in 1924. The musicians in the band gave me a hard time over my wardrobe and the way I talked. I wasn't allowed to sing because they thought my voice was too rough. I left the band in 1925 and returned to Chicago. Back in Chicago, OK Records decided to let me make my first records with a band under my name, Louis Armstrong and the Hot Five. From 1925 to 1928, I made more than 60 records with the Hot Five and later the Hot Seven. I began singing in my recordings, popularizing wordless scat singing with my hugely popular vocals in 1926 Heebies Jeebies. I performed nightly with Erskine Tate's orchestra at the Vinome Theater, where I often played music for silent movies. While I was performing with Tate in 1926, I finally switched from the cornet to the trumpet. My popularity began to grow in Chicago as I began playing at other venues. I met Earl Hines, a young pianist who assimilated my idea into piano playing. Hines and I formed a team and made some of the greatest recordings in jazz history in 1928. The latter performance is one of my best known works. In the summer of 1929, I went to New York where I had a role in a Broadway production of Connie's Hot Chocolate. That same year, I recorded with small New Orleans influenced groups, and I began recording in larger ensembles. Instead of doing strictly jazz numbers, I began to record popular songs including I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Stardust, and Body and Soul. My daring vocal transformations of these songs completely changed the concept of popular singing in American popular music. By 1932, I was known as Satchmo. I began appearing in movies and made my first tour in England. As though I was beloved by other musicians, I was too wild for most critics, who gave me racist and harsh reviews on my career. But I didn't let that stop me. I then returned as an even bigger star when I began a longer tour throughout Europe in 1933. Without my accomplishments, jazz wouldn't be the same, scatting wouldn't be popular, and it wouldn't contribute to the African American history and culture. A typical day in my life would consist of me recording new songs in recording studios, playing in the streets for money, and performing at clubs and dances. Whenever I wasn't recording in the studio, I would travel to many different places and perform there. In 1936, I became the first African American jazz musician to write an autobiography called Swing That Music. That same year, I became the first African American to get featured in a major Hollywood movie, Pennies from Heaven. I was also the first African American to host a nationally sponsored radio show in 1937. In 1965, I won a Grammy Award for Best Vocal Performance with my song Hello Dolly. My personality and style left an impact in the music industry as a whole. I continue to influence and inspire musicians all around the world to this day.
All the girls are on me, down. Everybody pay attention. This right here is my pretty boy